Leads are the lifeblood for any entrepreneurial venture. Having the ability to generate your own prospects, people are interested in your products and services, can be the difference for success and failure for any type of business. Today, I'll be interviewing my friend and new faculty member for Bootcamp MD, Dr. John Jurica. Now, John has one of the biggest Facebook groups for physicians, and he also hosts a popular podcast for doctors who are interested in non-clinical careers. We're going to be talking about how he builds his lists, how he gets people warmed up to purchase his products online. So coming up next, we'll be talking about one of my favorite subjects, online lead generation, on this episode of Bootstrap MD. Hey guys, this is Dr. Mike Blooming with Bootstrap MD. Today, I'm really privileged to introduce you to someone I've got to know in the last year. And you probably have heard the name if you've been on any of the Facebook groups. He's the moderator of the Physician Non-Clinical Career Hunters group. It's probably the most popular Facebook group that I know of in terms of if you're looking for non-clinical jobs. I got to be privileged to be interviewed by John about a year ago when I was trying to get my name out in all the different podcasts, and he was definitely a name that I kept seeing again and again. So most of you know who he is. He's a good friend, and this will be the first time to announce that he'll be one of our speakers at our Bootcamp MD workshop for physicians who want to start an online business or want to build their online business. And he is definitely one of the experts in terms of building his business online and through lead generation. So without further ado, John Jurica, thank you for joining me on the program today.
You're welcome, Mike. It's great to be here. It's good to see you.
It's good. We probably chat like at least once a month. We're in a little mastermind group together, so we're always sharing ideas, and I'm always learning something from John. And I have to say, when I got to meet you in person at Michelle Madrali's event, I reiterated you're the nicest guy in the non-clinical career, whatever we call the industry that we have here.
Oh, we're all cutthroat, aren't we? No.
We're all cutthroat, yeah.
We all support one another. We're trying to just help each other, and we learn from each other, so it's great.
Well, I know you got a busy schedule, so I want to get right to it. So some know your name, like I said, from the Non-Clinical Career Hunters Facebook group. I know you also do courses such as in becoming a medical science liaison. But how did you kind of get started in all of this? It's just like one day I just see your name everywhere. And so how did that begin?
Okay, I'll try and give you the short version. I was a family physician practicing like we all do initially, and I got into hospital management. So I actually left family medicine and became a chief medical officer for a while. And I left that about 5 years ago because I kind of felt like doing something different, something entrepreneurial like you. And so I opened an urgent care center, but I had some time on my hands. So I wrote a blog that was geared to my experiences as a CMO. But that morphed very quickly into my podcast because I saw that there were a lot of burnout, a lot of people out there looking for non-clinical careers. And I thought, well, I wanted to learn more about that and become sort of an expert at some point. I don't think I'm there yet, but the best way I figured I could do that would be to interview people. And I thought, well, let's do a podcast. Let's interview people. Well, I'll learn, they'll learn. And so that's what happened. That was about 2 years ago. I just recently hit 100 episodes. And so in the meantime, I've met a lot of people like you and others in the space. It's been fantastic. It's been great. So I'm continuing to learn.
Yeah, what's interesting is your site, which is Vital, and forgive me if I forget it wrong, it's vitalpe.net. And I thought PE stood for physician entrepreneur, but you called it physician executive, which I thought was interesting. Is that something that you were specifically going to work with physician executives, and did things change? How did that all work out?
That's kind of a legacy thing. My blog that I started 5 years ago originally was called The Vital Physician Executive, and I was basically writing specifically about hospital management, work as a chief medical officer, and that sort of thing. So when I started the podcast, rather than create a new place for the show notes, I just piggybacked on the old one. So that's why it's a little confusing. But yes, it's vitalpe.net, which refers to the physician executive. But I like your idea of physician entrepreneur. That would fit right in. Maybe I should change that.
I think it's because, John, because when I've been seeing you of late, and especially with some of the podcasts that you've been doing, I could definitely tell you've been going through more of an entrepreneurial bent there. Am I mistaken here, or is that something that's true?
That is true, and I think my entrepreneurial tendencies go back forever. I have a lot of family members who are entrepreneurs, and I helped my wife open a franchise 10 years ago as an entrepreneur, and so I definitely have that. In fact, I've interviewed several guests who are entrepreneurs. I figure that's just another form of non-clinical career. And then also, I started the podcast as kind of a labor of love, but I do want to create a business out of the podcast, or let's put it this way, use the podcast as a platform, a part of a business, which will be devoted basically to inspiring and supporting and teaching physicians how to pursue a non-clinical career.
Now, you were primary care background, right? I believe
Right.
family medicine that you were started with. I assume just clinical work, seeing patients like everyone else. What made you decide to go into the non-clinical route?
Well, I wouldn't say that I was burnt out, but I had some of the feelings. I was getting frustrated. I was getting bored in some ways. In family medicine, you can go days with all you're seeing is colds and influenza and things like that. And the paperwork was getting a little, annoying. And I did enjoy, though, like going to meetings and organizing projects and doing things. So it was kind of a combination, kind of a pull and a push away from medicine. So that's what led me into the administrative role in the hospital. I found that very rewarding. I mean, there was no call. I got to work with 10 other really bright people that were running a really awesome hospital. We had great scores and all that. So it was fun. I enjoyed quality improvement and so forth. So that it kind of pulled me into it.
So what's a typical week for you, or is there a typical week for you? Because, I know there are a lot of doctors who are listening. They always want to say, what do you do? You just do your podcast? Are you monitoring the Facebook group? How do you manage all of those things? And I'm sure you have clinical responsibilities as well.
Yeah. So just to touch on the last point, so I started the urgent care 5 years ago with several investors. Opened another one 2 months ago. But I'm only working 8 days a month at those. So I can work from home as a medical director and just do clinical 8 days a month, which probably will get less over time. So I don't know, a typical week, then I will work maybe 1 or 2 days, depending on which week of the month it is, at the urgent care center, usually doing a 12-hour shift. But the rest of the time, I'm either, I'm doing a lot of the legwork for the podcast. I'm looking for guests. I'm trolling for guests in a way on the Facebook group or in the LinkedIn. I get a lot of guests in LinkedIn. I have about 1,200 followers on LinkedIn, and a lot of them are doing non-clinical things. So I reach out to them. I'm, writing guest blog posts and that sort of thing. And then the podcast for me does take up quite a bit of time because I'm doing a lot of the legwork myself. I have a freelancer that helps me do the editing and some of the other things. I pay someone to do the editing of the audio and a freelancer to do the editing of the show notes. But I'm scheduling people. I'm doing the interviews. I'm prepping them, sending them out to get edited, and then posting them, and then doing all of the social media outreach that comes after that. So that would take 1 or 2 days generally, and then doing kind of related things on the side.
But the thing is that it sounds like you love what you're doing, which I think is the most important thing.
No, I really like it. I love doing it. I'm an introvert by nature, but I mean, I call it networking on steroids. I mean, having a podcast is like networking on steroids. I have so many colleagues and friends now that started out as guests on my podcast, like you. It's just crazy, and it's enjoyable. Everybody is supportive. We all want to help physicians. That's why we're here. I mean, yes, we like to teach people how to open a business or how to move into some non-clinical career, but we really are here to help physicians have a life that they love, if they're burnt out or they're bored or whatever it may be. So it's a lot more fun than being on the grind of seeing, 20, 30 patients a day.
Now, I'm always curious anytime I have someone like yourself who is, pretty part-time, Do you get any, and since you have an urgent care, I assume you work with doctors who are full time. Do you get any feedback? Do you get any resentment? Anything like that that you want to share?
I had more of that when I moved into the hospital leadership position, because that was in a day when there weren't a lot of hospital executives that were physicians, and a lot of my colleagues, because I stayed at the hospital where it was. So a lot of my colleagues like, oh, you're on the dark side now, you're part of the problem, which is the opposite. Really, I did that so I could be part of the solution. I don't get much of that in the urgent care now, only because I'm not really around that many physicians. Typically, I'm not part of a medical staff. We're not part of a system. We're freestanding. So I just do my thing and have a good time doing that when I can.
Do you think that this is another anecdotal thing? I think, these days, and maybe it's just because I'm biased in the physicians that I see on a regular basis, and I'm sure you do yourself, is that most physicians are not looking for the full-time job anymore, and it's switching now to a part-time. I did a little impromptu survey, so I don't know how scientific this is. I have an epidemiological background, so don't quote me on the statistics part of it. But I asked them. I says, would you rather work 5 days a week and make $500,000 a year, or would you work 1 day a week and make $100,000 a year? It was like 80 to 90% said 100,000 a year. And then I don't know if it's medicine in general or if it's they're missing something. I don't know. Have you seen this? I just see more physicians are just looking for, quote, side gigs, no matter what it is.
Well, I think whether it's someone who's been in practice for a while or even residents coming out, they see that it's a recipe for burnout from day one. Yeah. I mean, you have to cram so much into residency now. And even when you come out, you're not really fully ready to practice. And I mean, I can't imagine them looking forward to 10 or 20 years of working 80 hours a week or something like that. And the other thing is, there's just so much more focus on balance. And I've been really shocked in a way by the number of guests I've had on the podcast who just love balancing multiple careers. And even if they're super busy, they end up being less burnt out. They could be a super busy OB-GYN who's doing some side gig, selling something or doing coaching, and they're just so satisfied. And so I think there's just something to having multiple outlets instead of that focus on we're going to just do medicine 24/7, 365.
Yeah, I mean, when I graduated medical school 18 decades ago, right, it was a calling. This wasn't a job, it was a calling.
Right.
And now it's, I thought when I got out of residency, I'd work at one job for 30 plus years, have a 401k and retire. I don't know any doctor who does that these days. If they do, they're doing locums, they'll work at a place for a couple of years and move on to something else.
We may have a biased view. I do think there's still a number of physicians who go out there and they just put their head down and they just love doing what they're doing. I know neurosurgeons and neurologists and endocrinologists that seem to have that attitude. Oncologists, I mean, just some personal friends that would never think of doing anything else. But I think they're becoming less and less common. It seems to be a trend.
So I'm going to kind of switch gears. And where I first really kind of noticed you is on the non-clinical career hunters, it's a mouthful, sorry, group, which was actually started by someone else. I believe her name was Laura,
yes.
Correct? And how did you ended up moderating that group? Because she's not too much around, at least I see on the Facebook group. How did you end up taking that over and how did that all begin for you?
Okay, let's see. Short version. So she started the group in 2016, Laura McCain, and she's still one of the admins. It's sort of, it's a closed group. It's 100% physicians, but it's not like the kind of a private group that some people have, their own Facebook group they try to monetize. This is open to all physicians, and we don't allow any kind of advertising on it, at least to this point. And anyway, I met Laura because we were both at a big national meeting, that's devoted to non-clinical careers that's held in Chicago. And, we kind of struck up a conversation and she mentioned it. This was in 2017, I think. She mentioned, you might be a good admin for this. Nothing happened, but about a year later, then I joined as an admin because she was getting overwhelmed. She works full time in a drug company in pharmacovigilance. So
Hmm.
she's still on the group, but you just don't see her as often. She also does a side gig. She's been a coach and a resume writer for physicians, but I think it's difficult to get her to do that, but you can reach out. But anyway, so I started helping her out basically, and I've been kind of shocked that it's continued to grow. I mean, back then we only had about 4,000 or 5,000 members, but we're coming up on 12,000 members, and we're still adding like 200 members a month, which I just blows me away. I'm like, really? But it's fun, and there's a lot of engagement, and a lot of the members help each other. It's pretty self-sustaining.
So you don't do any marketing for your group whatsoever, or are you doing anything?
My only marketing is occasionally I mention it on the podcast and maybe in my show notes, but no, that's it. We don't advertise it for sure. And there's a little bit of crossover with some other groups that do, address similar things, but nothing formal.
And so were you active in the group? Is that why you kind of reached out to her, or how did that?
Yeah, I was active. I was contributing. I was, about my experiences with non-clinical careers. And then I think I actually, she agreed for me to post my podcast episodes on the Facebook group even before I was an admin. So I would put those out every week there, and she was seeing that there was interest in it. And again, I wasn't doing any selling whatsoever on the podcast at that time. So it was basically free content for her, and the members liked it. And then she thought, well, this would align with what I was doing. And I did meet her, like I said, once or twice at this meeting. So we had a chance to chat, face to face.
Now, some of our listeners have always been interested in starting a Facebook group or have a Facebook group. Just curious, how much time does it take for you to moderate, such a large group like that?
So I have no set schedule. Facebook sends out notices, most of which I ignore. Because it's just every time someone does a like, somebody does a post, somebody does any kind of comment, it'll let me know. But I usually just squeeze it in between other things that I'm doing. So once or twice a day, I'll go on there. And there are many days that I don't contribute. I'm just kind of looking and watching. I have to also admit new members. Laura and I both do that. So because we have some screening that we do to try and, make sure that it's physicians. So that takes, maybe 15 minutes a week just to admit new members, quickly look through their responses to the questions. And then I do post on there, not only the podcast episodes, I put it on there routinely, but I contribute some information. Sometimes if I create a free resource, which does help build my email list, but it's a freebie, I'll put those out there for new members. And I welcome new members usually every 2 or 3 weeks just to try and stimulate some conversation. So it's really not a lot of time. And I think it's a pretty good return, on the time invested.
Yeah. So curious, how's the Facebook helped you in terms of your other endeavors? You mentioned that, you get some little bit of email list that you contribute, but anything that you want to share, or maybe any insights that you've had since you've been moderating the Facebook group?
Well, let's see. What kind of insights are you talking about? Insights like I've learned from the physicians, or
right, or any trends or anything that you've been seeing?
Oh, yeah. It's crazy. The insights are, I cannot believe how popular this whole topic is. And it doesn't seem to be slowing down. In fact, I think if our patients knew how many physicians were looking at non-clinical careers, they'd be shocked. But again, I would not have expected to have thousands of physicians, interacting on that site. I'm impressed by the fact that it's really all specialties. It's all ages. It does have a range, though. We have a number of physicians on the group who have their MD-DO or maybe MBBS, the equivalent, and do not have residency. So they're kind of a group that is really like, okay, I've got a medical degree. I never did really do a residency, and I don't know how to get some career that uses the MD but doesn't have the clinical background. So there's a subset of that. And then there's just, physicians all the way that have been, are boarded in multiple specialties and have been working for years, or just have reached the point where they want to slow down and they have no idea how to do it. We never talk about this in med school or residency. So it's pretty amazing. I do think there's a significant number that really they come right out and say, I'm burnt out. I have to get out. What do I do? It's something I see on there almost every day. and it usually leads to a long list of responses and suggestions and things. We have a number of coaches in there too, which is very interesting. There's a lot of physician coaching going on out there. And most of them, take it very seriously. They've gone to training, and they sometimes they want to kind of promote themselves in the group. So I have to kind of keep that to a minimum. But if they can offer free advice or free resources, we let them, interact for sure. But so that's interesting. A lot of coaches, and I think there's something about being a physician and wanting to help patients that kind of is a natural to move into coaching, which, by the way, is also natural for starting an online business. So it's when I look at it, it's the coaching, consulting, speaking, writing. You put those in. You as a physician, you usually have a lot to offer in one of those areas that you can convert into like an online business. So it's interesting to me.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about more of that. I'm curious, and you made a hint about it earlier in the talk about how you started a podcast because it allowed you to meet people and network. Was that the plan all along, or was it just like you like to hear yourself talk? No.
Yeah, I play those back to myself. It's kind of fun to listen to my own podcast, but no. I tell you, it was interesting. First of all, this job that I do as urgent care, medical director, it's a minimum of an hour drive from where I live. So I had been listening to a ton of podcasts just by virtue of doing that. That was one thing. So I have a natural affinity for that. The second thing that when I looked into it a little bit, there are over 500 million blogs that are out there at this point. I mean, some are defunct. There's less than 1 million podcasts, and it's still growing. So I thought, okay, so that's cool. It's growing, but it's not quite as competitive. I had heard other podcasters that were starting to talk about the things I'm talking about. And then the last thing was, it's a very personal medium. It's kind of like a video, but it's much more convenient to listen to a podcast than to watch a video. But I had somebody come up to the meeting that we were at with Michelle Mudge Riley. She says, "Are you John Jurica? I recognize your voice." So it's like she had been listening to the podcast, and she could just recognize my voice. So you have that much more personal than, let's say, a blog or something like that.
Yeah, it's always cool when I hear someone say, "Oh yeah, you were my jogging partner," or
Right.
you kept me listening to the podcast because it's easy. And I think for physicians, we're not usually in front of the TV or in front of it, but we can always commute.
Right.
Were there certain podcasts that you listened to that you liked that you kind of modeled yourself after, or how did you kind of position your podcast, or how did you organize your podcast?
Well, yeah, when someone's becoming a podcaster, you have to decide, am I going to do solo episodes? Am I going to do interviews? Am I going to do a 5-minute, a 15-minute, a 30-minute, a 1 hour long form, whatever? So I could say I patterned myself after Tim Ferriss, but I'm not going to go there. Really, I thought I wanted to do an interview because I wanted to learn. So most of my episodes are interviews, not all of them. And Docs Outside the Box, you might know D. Darko. He has a podcast. He was out there about a year before myself. David Draginis started the same time pretty much as I did. And we took the same course to learn how to do our podcast from Pat Flynn. And so I listened to his and kind of model mine a little bit after his. And the people like that, basically.
So I'm going to kind of switch gears, and I know your time is short, so I want to respect your time.
Okay.
We're going to have you speaking at Boot Camp MD, which for you guys, if you don't know, is a workshop that I'm doing with Maisha, Dr. Maisha, and we're going to be doing it in Atlanta. It's coming in October. There's a link here if you like, and John will be actually speaking. And why I wanted to get John is because he's built up this this Facebook group. His podcast is growing leaps and bounds, and the important part of that is lead generation and list building. And you've kind of learned a lot about list building and lead generation. What can you share with us? You've tried different methods, I'm sure, just like all of us. Maybe,
Right.
What have you learned and what's been working for you?
Okay. First of all, I think that a mistake that a lot of us make, including myself, is that we don't focus on building our email list early enough. because it's like, well, it's going to build. If I have a podcast or a blog or something, people can sign up there. But there's a difference between signing up for, let's say, reading the blog. That doesn't really create an email list for you. An email list is important because then it gives you an audience, gives you a tribe that you can communicate with on a regular basis. And it's what we would call a warm audience or warm customers, in other words, versus, let's say, going out and doing an ad to try and get someone to buy your product or your service. They pretty much already know you. They like you because they're subscribed. So that was something that I had 100 in my list. I thought I have to start growing this. So I really started, learning what I could. And I'm not the world's expert, but I think you need to do everything from, having the sign up sheet on your website. And it's not the sign up sheet to get the blog from WordPress, but the sign up sheet to go to your email list. Those are two separate things. But people don't necessarily voluntarily do that unless they're going to get something in exchange, because they can hear your podcast by going to iTunes. They can read your blog by going to WordPress, but they don't have to be on your list. That's not a gatekeeper. So you have to do something extra. So then classically what you do is you can start by having like a landing page on your show notes or your website. So there's software for that. I happen to use Lead Pages. There's other, I think MailChimp, which is my email provider now, actually has a way to do that, but I happen to use Lead Pages and I like it a lot. That also gives you the ability to create buttons on your website, on your blog. It has the ability to do different kinds of pop-ups, things that show up while the person is reading, or maybe as they're going to exit. They call it an exit intent pop-up. And usually what you have to put in there, though, is something that will entice them to submit it. We're at a point now where basically everybody knows their email address is of some value. So you need to usually try and bribe them or entice them to sign up. But they're more than willing to do that if it's something good. So I use things like a 20-page guide on how to become a physician executive, or 6 non-clinical careers. One I've had a lot of success with recently was a couple of years ago. I put together a really short video on how to create your LinkedIn profile. And I just recently put that up, and it attracts a lot of attention. People want to look through that if they don't have a LinkedIn profile. So videos are good. Actually, I created a free course called, it was How to Become an MSL. It was more of an introduction, and I used that as what you call an opt-in magnet or lead magnet. And there's some other things you can do. You just need to be promoting all the time. Like I put options for people in the Facebook group to click on something, get that freebie and sign up. And for a while, I was doing a series of written newsletter type information that they could only get if they signed up. So you try and create something extra that's a little bit valuable, but not something that you're going to spend hours and hours and weeks working on, and people will sign up. And most of them stick around. Some sign up and then they jump off again once they get the freebie. And then I have used other things, like there's a way to create a contest. If you can get someone either to give you something of value or create something yourself of value, you can use some software called, it comes from King Sumo, I believe is the name. And you can create a situation where people sign up and they get more and more entries into this contest by virtue of sharing it on social media. And I think I'll be talking about these things, I think, at the conference, but that's kind of an interesting thing if you have the right prize, like one thing I could do now, because I do have online courses, I could take my most expensive course and say, okay, I will give this for free to, the person that wins this contest, and run that for a week and, get a few hundred, hopefully subscribers using that. So those are just some of the ways that I've personally used. I mean, you can use Facebook ads to grow an email list, which I have not used to date. And I was recently listening to someone talk about how to use LinkedIn to possibly do the same thing. Of course, I have links in everything that I post, and I do post on LinkedIn and Facebook consistently, but I haven't actually used that to try and pay for people to sign up for my list.
I like what you said. There's a couple points that I want to kind of bring out that's interesting, is that I like to call them lead magnets. People call it different things.
Right.
But it's funny, like I'll go to my dentist and I'll go to their website and they'll say, sign up for my newsletter. Boring.
Yeah, right.
It's like,
why should I?
And that's it. But Yeah, what is that? But you're right. Email is valuable, but you got to give them something that's interesting. And then the second thing that was interesting to me was you had mentioned that you're like your top converting one of your top converting lead magnets was a how to create your profile on LinkedIn. It's something very very specific, and I think that any type of like how to type of thing, and it's video. I think you're hitting it right on the button there. That it is something that, it's you know specifically what you're going to get, because even in your email address, people don't get just one email a day, right? They
Right.
they get 200 to 300. It's like, I don't need more stuff. But you see something like this is valuable, and this is worth, if you could put a price to it, like this is like a real course that I'm going to give away for you that I was sold, and those will always do well. And you'll be speaking more about this, so we're going to get some real life data for you at Bootcamp MD. Is that correct?
Yes, I'll be there, and I'll be sharing. I have a few other tricks up my sleeve that I use as well. So,
Well, John, this has been wonderful. I know you got to go. Any kind of last minute tips you want to give or advice to give for the listeners today?
Well, I think, this your audience is physicians, looking at possibly creating a business of some sort, and whether that's with still doing clinical or not. I think just keep your chin up, be hopeful. It can be daunting at times, but I can give you examples of hundreds of physicians have successfully moved into a non-clinical career, and even probably hundreds, at least dozens, that have moved into something entrepreneurial where they're doing it themselves. I personally believe that we can build on the clinical side if we want to. In other words, if you're a pediatrician and happens to know a lot about autism and wants to share that with a larger audience, you need some of the skills that we've talked about today, and a ton of others I think you're going to talk about in the conference. But it's so easy these days because the technology has gotten to where you can almost do this for free to a certain level. It just takes time. It takes knowing other people that you can help get some support from. And to me, it's just so much more fun at this point in my career to do. And so don't feel like you can't do it. You definitely can. And, we're here to help you.
What I love about it too is someone who actually left medicine 15 plus years ago. I think it was myself, Michelle, and maybe a few others were talking about non-clinical careers. And other than that, we're almost deemed pariahs talking about that now. Or there was this obstacle like how I can't build a business online. How does that work? It's not for me. And now you've got all these Facebook groups, tens of thousands of people. You interview almost every other week a successful physician entrepreneur is actually doing it. It's not just theory. They're actually going out there and if not making a living, at least building some income for them that they can, they're building what I call digital assets that are continuing to grow.
Right.
And so, the way I think this is the best time to actually get started. As mentioned, many of these things are free now. As someone who got started selling online before even PayPal and building sites by hand using a product called Dreamweaver, and now you can get sites and built and using lead pages and ClickFunnels and all the different tools that are out there make it a lot easier. Well, John, thank you again. It's been a pleasure. I look forward for you speaking at Bootcamp MD, again, coming up in October. If you want to register, we'll leave a link here, and you can go ahead and register. Let us know that you listen to the podcast. We'd love to have you. And because really, there are things with the online business that, there's so much, as you know, there's so many things that you need to go through. I really think you need to have someone who's actually been there and actually done that that can actually teach you how to do it. And that's why we're having an expert like John here. Thanks again, John. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
You're welcome. I really look forward to seeing you soon in Atlanta and seeing all of your students. So take care and thanks a lot.
Thanks again to everybody. And as always, keep moving forward.